It has been a little over a year now since Project Caesar was first announced to us, and despite the cryptic name, it has long been my belief, and that of the wider community, that the game is going to be Europa Universalis 5. I'm going to go forward with this assumption in place as it makes everything so much easier. With the conclusion of the latest dev diary stating that they had now gone through all of the core mechanics of the game, I thought there was no better time than now to go through what I believe are the best changes to the game over what we have in EU4. In EU4, there are, if we're just talking about your average tag and not migratories, 30 buildings, with a maximum of 12 buildings being available to be built at any one time. These buildings can definitely be impactful, but essentially they merely act as modifiers on your province. A workshop gives extra production efficiency, a barracks gives you a modifier to your manpower, a temple to your tax, etc. But in EU5, things are a little bit different. While we don't know how many buildings there will be, we do know that locations in the game will not have building slots, and that buildings are more than just modifiers. To start with, buildings will cost more than just gold to construct. The hospital, for example, requires masonry, glass, and lumber goods to be available in your market to even begin the construction, and it doesn't stop there either. Your new hospital will be worthless if you don't have the right materials to run it. Most buildings have one or more production methods, which is the goods that you are required to maintain the building with to keep it operational. The hospital, once built, requires a steady source of fiber crops, tools, paper, books and medicaments, and mercury to keep it running. Buildings also need to be staffed by your population, as each building also has employment, and in the hospital's case, you need 100 clergy to work in the building to give you the plague resistance and life expectancy it offers. As far as depth goes, EU5 is on a whole different level, and has more in common with how Victoria 2 works than its predecessor. I've made absolutely no secret of my dislike for the development mechanic in EU4. Three values that determine the value of a province that can be at any moment boosted at a cost of magical points you generate based on how much of a Chad your ruler is and how much money you want to spend on advisors is, in my opinion, a pretty terrible mechanic. EU5 has done away with development and the mana that sustains it and replaced it with a proper population system. Every location in the game will have an amount of pops in it, ranging from 0 in uninhabited lands destined to one day have a flag planted on them by the British, all the way up to the tens or even hundreds of thousands. The pops also work in the various buildings you construct in your lands, or even in some cases, the buildings you construct in others' lands. The populations are split up by culture and religion too, so any one location can have a marvelous mix of different pops within it, and the game can accurately showcase diasporas and minorities within provinces without any jank. Pops are also split up by their social status, with, so far, peasants, tribesmen, slaves, burghers, nobles, and clergy all confirmed, with potentially more coming down the line. Your population is massively important, and you will definitely be feeling the loss of them when they happen to die, be that from disease, natural disasters, or simply because they were drafted into your army and happened to die on the field. Because pops are also what make up your manpower, and it's no longer a floating abstraction based on development. Pops are huge and easily, in my opinion, the single biggest improvement over EU4. In EU4, the smallest breakdown of land area was the province, but in EU5, those have been broken down even further, and now we have locations. Not only are there around 10 times as many locations in EU5 as there are provinces in EU4, but the attributes assigned to them are so much more deep and impactful, such as the breakdown of locations into being cities, towns, or rural settlements, with each having their own unique buildings available to them. Firstly, development is gone, or rather the type of development in EU4. Development exists in EU5, but it is a completely different concept that has more similarities with Imperator's civilization level mechanic. But development has to be replaced with something. That something is, of course, population. But what determines how many people can live in a location? How do we say how much a location can support? That is where terrain comes in. First and most importantly is vegetation. This can be anything from grassland to forest to desert and jungle, and it gives you a base amount of population that the location can support. For example, at the top end, the best terrain for pop capacity is farmland. This can support 100,000 pops. A desert, on the other hand, can only support 10,000. And if this were it, it would already be an improvement over EU4. but these basic capacities have modifiers in the form of climate and topography. Again, going with the best first, we have the Mediterranean climate, multiplying the population capacity by 150%, where the worst is Arctic, lowering your capacity by 55%. On the topography side, flatland is the best, though it gives no modifiers, and mountains lower the capacity by a further 80%. An Arctic desert mountain would have a population capacity of 1,000, as that is as low as it can possibly get, whereas a flat Mediterranean farmland, just based on the terrain, gives 150,000. This is then further increased if that location happens to be a town or a city. This is far better than some dev cost modifiers. International organizations are groups of countries that share common things and have various attributes that can be defined, such as membership benefits or penalties, laws and policies, and special statuses inside an organization. The system is new to Paradox titles and essentially is a way to replace a whole slew of various hard coded mechanics like the HRE and Japanese shogunate into a completely dynamic system. 100% scriptable and extendable for modders, allowing for a wide range of attributes and flavors to be added. IOs can be a permanent thing, like membership of the Catholic Church is available to every country that is a part of the Catholic faith, or temporary for things such as coalitions, crusades, and jihads. The thing that excites me most about this feature is how open ended it is. Modders have for years had to jury rig existing mechanics for use in their mods, and then they could only use each system once. No matter if two regions in your fantasy mod could both make use of the daimyo system, it could only be used once. Now that this system has been made, modders will have a much easier time for adapting their vision into their mods, and that can only be a good thing. Trade is another part of EU4 that I've been pretty vocally against for quite a long time, as I see the system as nothing more than theft. Trade flows downstream, money is taken away from upstream, and it all ends up in Europe. And this is just not accurate to how trade worked in the real world. The other big drawback to EU4's trade is just how static it is. Locked in place trade nodes with locked in place flows of direction meant that no matter how much more prosperous and amazing you made the Constantinople node, for example, it would still always flow into Ragusa, regardless of how destitute and devastated it was. EU5's trade, though, improves on EU4 in practically every single way. Trade nodes have been replaced by markets that can grow and shrink dynamically, depending on the attraction of the market, diplomacy, and more. Instead of just gold flowing downstream between different markets, trade is now goods based, with no set direction of flow. The price of each good is also dynamic, changing based on supply and demand rather than having a set price with modifiers. And if you have a demand that the supply cannot match, you can use your merchant capacity to import that good from another market. Speaking of goods, there's around 60 of these, though that number has gone up over the past year of Tinto Talks, as community pressure has led to the introduction of beeswax and the splitting of the spice trade good into multiple different spices. More is sure to follow as the game progresses. In my opinion, no Paradox game has ever done Mercenaries right, even despite EU4 having two whole systems to cover them with their update in the Emperor DLC back in 2020. EU5, though, may have finally gotten it right. Mercenary companies will be hired in EU5 by first looking for a commander, with his administrative ability determining how expensive he is and how many units he has available to him, and his military ability determining how good of a general he is, of course. You can then choose what composition of units you want to hire from him based on what units are commonly available in the area being recruited from, with more being available if the place and population he's drawing that army from is suffering from devastation and a lack of stability. These mercenaries stick around for only a set period of time, the length of the mercenary contract, though this can be extended if you so desire. And you also have the ability to bribe your opponent's mercenary companies at a high price if you want fewer troops to be arrayed against you. Players can also rent out their own regular regiments as mercenaries to earn gold and experience, though unlike EU4's condottieri system, the player won't be in control of these regiments as they fight their foreign wars. Armies are made up of the people who fight in them, and due to the population system present in EU5, that means your armies are directly linked to the pops that make up your country, which in all likelihood will be your most precious resource of all. There are some major differences between this and EU4, the biggest probably being the change in time per tick that the game experiences during combat. The game's time system is based on hours, with the day ticking from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., and the remaining hours skipped over to represent rest and downtime, allowing for a more granular and realistic experience. And the game's speed is expected to be similar to EU4 or Imperator at max speed. When on the march, armies will slowly lose morale, which means positioning will be a high priority in your wars, especially when terrain also has a significant impact, as you'll have the ability to hide your armies in woods and forests or in mountains, with vision adjacency not penetrating the geography. One of the other big changes is the introduction of a levy system like in Imperator Rome. Regular regiments have 100 men in them at the start of the game, and that will increase over time, but a levy will start with 1,000, with the Chinese having regiments of 1,500. This is to make the game a little bit more manageable. The example given in the dev diary was of Poland, who can raise 11,000 men at the start of the game, which would equate to 110 regiments. This is a lot, but not insurmountable, but then consider the example of China, who can raise 700 of these regiments, and you'll begin to see the issue. As they said in the dev diary, Yuan breaks everything. Logistics is also going to be a huge part of the game, arguably even more of a break in tradition from EU4. Food, first and foremost, will be something that your regiments will need to continue to function, as they are made up of pops after all. But you will also need to continually be supplying your army, as every regiment has an upkeep not only of gold like in EU4, but also of goods and manpower. Every unit in the game is capable of storing an amount of food that will deplete when not being supplied in friendly territory, but when on an expedition into foreign lands, they will require some kind of auxiliary unit to transport the food and armaments required for them to stay at peak efficiency. This kind of logistic system is aided by the supply depot system, where an army can deposit food to and it will automatically supply any army within range of it. The new automated army system, inspired by Imperative Rome's, has even got a dedicated supply train action, so you can have supply wagons automatically supplying your forces as they attempt to siege out your enemy. Combat may have gotten some changes in mechanics, but the way you create and supply your armies will have a much, much larger impact on how you play the game. In EU4, the amount of taxes and production and manpower you could take out of a province was determined by its autonomy, which usually, no matter how far away from your capital that province happened to be, always ended up trending towards zero, giving you the absolute maximum from that province without issue. In EU5, however, that system of autonomy is being replaced by what is being dubbed as control. Every location owned by the player has a control value, which is primarily determined by its proximity to the capital or other source of authority, and this control value is crucial as it affects the amount of tax that can be collected from the population, the number of levies that can be contributed, and the market attraction of the location, with a lack of control leading to reduced crown power, manpower, and sailors, as well as a weaker market. Proximity is a distance to capital value that is affected by the mode of travel, with traveling on the open sea being extremely costly, while traveling along coastlines with high maritime presence or tracing along major rivers reducing the proximity cost, and building a road network can further reduce these costs. The maritime presence is a vital aspect of the game, as it impacts the proximity calculations and the power of merchants in the market. It's built up over time based on the player's ports and other buildings in adjacent locations, with the presence of a navy helping to improve it, while blockades and pirates can decrease it, making it essential to protect coastlines during wars to avoid long term consequences. If I asked you what country types there are in EU4, you'd probably respond with something like monarchies and republics and such. But in EU5, things are a little different. In addition to the landowning, location based countries like the ones I just mentioned, EU5 will also include playable tags that don't own land, such as building based countries like trade companies and banking countries. They own buildings and have subjects that own land, and can provide loans to other countries and take over your estate loans, allowing them to accumulate wealth and influence. Army based countries, on the other hand, only exist as long as they have an army and can simulate certain historical phenomena, but risk shattering into multiple pieces if they lose that army. The fourth type of country is unfortunately not playable, that being the societies of pops, and these are based on the pops associated with them. They can migrate and force alliance changes through warfare, raising levies and living off the land, but currently have a limited gameplay experience and will almost certainly be AI only at release. The game also features Holy Orders and the Hanseatic League as building based countries, and also the daimyos of Japan use the system too, offering a range of playable entities and game mechanics for players to explore. The game's design also allows for different types of countries to interact and influence each other, with trade companies and banking countries playing a significant role in the game's economy, and societies of pops and army based countries offering unique challenges and opportunities to players. Unions in EU5 are under the umbrella of international organizations, which I covered previously. But I feel these deserve their own special place. As compared to EU4's convoluted mess, unions in EU5 seem far more predictable, with a whole slew of new mechanics attached to them that are simply absent in EU4. Firstly, unions in EU5 are not a subject type of relationship. All partners begin at the same level, with a newly generated union only having a defensive pact between them. To become the head of the personal union and eventually integrate your partners, you need to call your union parliament and become the senior partner. Once you're there, you can then pass successive centralization policies until you can unify the crowns and integrate your partners. This parliament mechanic, where you pass these policies, functions similarly to the parliament mechanic in EU4, though nowhere near as clunky, and requires you to bribe and cajole the other members of your union until you have over 50% support for whatever it is you're trying to pass. These can be the centralization policies previously mentioned, or they can be generic ones, like changing the defensive pact to a more offensive one. There are many more things here that I could have mentioned in my top 10, like how the Black Death or Great Pestilence can devastate your populations with the new situation system, or the societal value system that lets you tailor your country to what you want it to be, to the upgrade to the estate system, or how there's now an earthquake system, or even how technology has changed from the static three linear tech groups into a whole tree of individual advances, and so much more. What updates to the game are you most excited about? Are there any hidden gems that I may have overlooked in my video? Stick around and subscribe for more E5 news and hopefully in the near future some gameplay too. It is an exciting time to be Grand Strategy fan. Bye bye.